So good. So just to flag, yes, the recording is taking place for this event. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. You're very welcome to our AI in Ag Masterclass that is hosted by the Vista Milk Research Centre. My name is Claire Gormley. I'm a principal investigator within Vista Milk, and I'm also based in the School of Maths and Statistics in University College Dublin in Ireland. You're very welcome to Vista Milk, albeit virtually. It's an advantage and a pity that these events are virtual, and it's great to reach out to such a wide audience. But just to welcome you to our Vista Milk community. And for those on the call who may not be familiar with Vista Milk, I'll begin just by sort of setting the scene before we lead off with today's talks. So what Vista Milk is a unique collaboration between the agri-food and information communications technology, essentially two worlds led by research institutes here in Ireland, and also Irish and multinational food and ICT companies. We're kindly funded by Science Foundation Ireland, who are the national scientific funding agency for research in Ireland, and also by the Irish government's Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. So the pictures you can see in front of you are images of all of us within Vista Milk. So we're an eclectic mix of people from both the agri-food sector and from the ICT side of things. We're all working collectively towards the Vista Milk vision, which is to be an agent of responsible and sustainable growth for the Irish dairy and agri-tech industry, by striving to be a world leader in both fundamental and translational research for digital pasture-based dairying. So a grand vision, but one that we're really excited to contribute to, and very much focusing on that responsible and sustainable aspects of our vision. Collectively, we're aiming to drive sustainable competitiveness, to cement and build academic and industry relationships, to use those relationships as catalysts to drive future research, and to use that research, importantly, to address societal challenges across a wide spectrum. And very much training for the future, training people and doing research for the future. Part of our vision is to create and contribute to the creation of the future of agri-tech industry, and to train highly trained staff that will contribute to and drive that. We've important work to do. We face a lot of challenges. The world at present is exciting, but a volatile place to be, between politics, climate change. We need to be concerned with animal welfare. There's economics, and then there's a huge amount of societal and public discourse. And all of these mixed together give us a lot of challenges that we need to tackle and tackle appropriately. And that's really what the Vista Milk Research Programme aims to do. This is our triangle here that summarizes or epitomizes what we aim to do within Vista Milk. So you can see along the bottom, for example, we focus on a wide range of enabling technologies, right from that fundamental research of development and right through to very quite applied research, looking at everything from sensors, whether they're in the soil or in food, through to communications, looking at omics and breeding, importantly, data analytics, which we'll obviously focus on today, and then right through to test beds and integration and deployment, hands-on with farmers in the yard. All of these feed into our three research themes, that of pasture, cow and food, and I'll speak to those a little more just during the rest of my overview this morning. But all of that work leads towards our strategic goals: food security, sustainability, and prosperity and societal enrichment. And everything we do, all of those faces that you saw at the start, as a collective, we aim to those strategic goals. Within that, we have important work to do. EPE, as we call it, or education and public engagement, is a key factor of all the work that we do. So we need to be able to talk about our research and translate it to the public and to farm. And also, we're very aware of the advantages that having a broad view of equality, diversity and inclusion brings to the work that we do. We are, as I mentioned, an eclectic mix. We come from a range of universities, technological universities, research institutes. Teagasc, the Irish body tasked with leading agricultural research, hosts Vista Milk, but works alongside many of us here in the universities. and also, for example, ICBF, the Irish Cattle Breeders Federation. The important logos, because there's too many to put on the slide here, are also the industry partners within Vistamilk, who really help create and drive forward that research agenda. Within all of the research that we do within Vistamilk, all of it is inspired by our three principles, and they are acquire, analyze, and act. So whether we're acquiring data through that's the development of sensors or the use of sensors, for example, and how we analyze that, the development of new methods to analyze data, or perhaps the use of existing methods, and then the deployment or the acting on that information, how that translates, for example, into processing plant or onto farm. So as all of us do our research within Vistamilk, we're constantly bringing ourselves back to these principles. And importantly, you'll notice the arrows going sort of in both directions here, that we don't work in silos in these principles. For example, the way in which we acquire the data may inform how we need to analyze the data, and the way in which we analyze the data may inform acting, but equally what we learn from the act process can feed back and make us reconsider how we analyze. So it's very much a continuum of principles. So the purpose of today is to get a lot of people together who are interested in talking about artificial intelligence in agriculture, or AI in ag. I'm not going to try and define what artificial intelligence is. It's a very broad field and a much discussed topic, but I think we could all agree that it's fair to say that it draws on ideas that originated in the fields of statistics and the fields of computer science. Where it's used is essentially everywhere across a wide range of sectors, from healthcare to law to government sectors, for example. But essentially it's anywhere and everywhere that data arise, and when we're tasked with making decisions based on that data. And therefore the ubiquity of data that now arises across the agriculture sector, particularly in Ireland, makes that relationship between AI and ag very much a beneficial interaction. Any advances that we can drive in AI can be applied and help inform decision making within the agriculture setting, but then some of the agriculture settings drive us to develop new techniques within the AI setting that wouldn't have been there otherwise. So it really is a mutually beneficial interaction. But we've lots of work to do. Data are heterogeneous. They come in a wide variety of forms. They can be vast, which is a real challenge. They can be very small, which is equally a challenge. Lots of data are missing. So we have so much data, but lots of it are missing. There's very unique dependency among data in the agriculture setting, whether it's animals of similar breed or parcels of land. And there's lots of dependency that we need to be very conscious of properly accounting for when we're doing our analyses. We very typically have longitudinal data or time series data, and I'm looking forward to hearing about that later today. Spatial data, whether it's parcels of land, and so on and so on. So we have lots of challenges, and the work is very much not done in terms of the work of AI in ag. So what I'm going to do just to sort of set off for today is to try and give a view of some of, it's only a snapshot of some of the research within Vistamilk that gives a view of where AI in ag is going. And I'll do that through going through or pulling a few examples from each of our three research themes. So one from pasture, a couple from cow, and from food. So beginning with pasture, here I'm going to draw on research of my colleagues in both Teagasc, in UCD here where I am, and also in Dublin City University. So again, that eclectic and catalytic mix of both domain experts and AI researchers to drive forward both fields. So as we all know, milk production is going to be highly dependent on the availability of adequate yields of high quality grass. But walking the land and manually phenotyping swards is really time consuming. It's labor intensive, and therefore comes at a very large cost. So the aim of this collaboration was to try and estimate key grass parameters to try and economically increase the yield and assist in the decision-making process of the farmer. If we're doing pasture management, rather than having to walk the land, can we understand and get a snapshot of the quality and yield of our grass in different land parcels without it being an extremely onerous process? So in this collaboration, a large volume of work was done capturing images to create a large database of images to allow us to estimate, for example, sward height or herbage mass. The overall objective here was to try and use some well-established and known to be excellent in terms of performance AI tools. So a neural network is probably familiar terminology to many of you on the call. So the idea here was to try and take all of these images that were collected by the research team, and then to train a neural network to accurately predict, for example, grass quality. So the overall idea is we could take a picture of our grass, we train our neural network, and we can estimate features of interest of that area of pasture. How this was done then in practice was through both images taken from high resolution cameras and also from handheld phones. So very much speaking to that deployment aspect of VistaMilk. Farmers aren't going to have high resolution cameras, so will this work if they're taking photos on their phone? So took, as I said, a large range of photos, and then some of these were what we call ground truths, so looked at by experts, and the quantity of different features, yield or different herbage mass was quantified. But also a unique aspect of the AI work in this project was to also make use of the large amount of unlabeled data where the sort of the ground truth wasn't known. So this has, for example, we could look at, say, estimating sward composition, and the AI development used a number of different ways of training the neural network model, whether fully supervised, semi-supervised, or unsupervised. And then we can assess performance in terms of predicting sward composition using, for example, the root mean squared error. And the authors, so largely led by Deirdre Hennessy and Paul Albert in DCU, were able to show really good and positive results. And very importantly, they also were able to demonstrate that there was good adaptability of their learnings from their images and their neural network to previously unseen data, which is really the practical application of work like this. So this has then generated a lot of work in this area, as I said, by several colleagues, Paul Albert in DCU, Deirdre Hennessy in Teagasc, and Brian McNamee here in UCD, to, for example, predicting herbage mass, but then using, for example, synthetic data to develop and improve in this, and right through to using drones, for example, to try and estimate biomass. But this is just an example. There's lots of other areas in VistaMilk where we're doing this sort of image analysis, bringing together agriculture and AI methods. So, for example, researchers in the Walton Institute, as part of VistaMilk, are also using neural networks, but this time to classify farmland habitat. So it's just an example of AI and ag and within VistaMilk from the pasture theme. Within the cow theme, again, there's a lot of work here. But for this, going to just draw on an example of Lucille Riaboff, who's a postdoctoral researcher in UCD, and again with collaborators, Lawrence Chalou from Teagasc and Mark Keane also here from UCD. And here they're interested in animal welfare and how we can use AI and ag activity sensors and AI to help us assess animal welfare, again, in a more cost-efficient and practical way. So we know since time gone by, farmers are going to constantly monitor their animals to assess their health status, but we can do that in modern times through movement sensors. So the goal here would be to try and develop a tool that farmers can quickly use to help monitor their animals' health status. What this generates, you can imagine some of these activity sensors or accelerometer data will generate vast volumes of time series analysis, absolutely vast, hugely dependent data over time and between animals. For example, in transport within lorries, hugely interesting and complex data. And again, we're looking forward to hearing more about this later today. So I think this is a really nice example of where sensors, so right in VistaMilk, there's a lot of work on, for example, sensor development, but this general sense of mixing sensors and AI, but very much that agriculture setting, to it's a really promising approach to ensure that animals are healthy, have sufficient grass to eat, and so on. But I think an important point to flag here is that, you know, humans, lots of us now have activity sensors, whether it's a smartwatch or something like that. But the set of tools and the unique combination of the issues and the complexity of the data that arise from sensors on animals is very different, for example, to the methods that could be used largely to analyze, for example, data from humans. So it's that unique sort of view from both sides that's needed to drive and advance both fields. So in the paper I just showed, you'll see the paper on the previous slide, some really nice work where they've looked at a broad range of applications. And again, to that point about using the context of the ag setting is hugely important. So for example, they look at different ways of splitting the data to assess how valid the different methods are. And it's only obviously within an agriculture setting that you could have to worry about splitting your data based on animals. But that context and domain knowledge is really important. And they looked at a different range of a broad array of different methods that have been used for classifying animal movement, for example, and behaviors using these activity sensors. So you can see there a broad range of sort of AI type tools, you know, words like supervised machine learning, ensembles, statistical models. So there's a lot of work in this area that is advancing it. And we can see the types of behaviors that this combination of AI and these activity sensors allow us to assess in the context of animal welfare. So everything from feeding performance to resting performance to moving performance. So some really nice and exciting work there. So it looks like there are several important behaviors that can be predicted from these accelerometers. The tricky piece is that those rarely observed or transitional behaviors have proven to be more difficult to predict, and commercial deployment is going to require the ability to generalize these methods, and that's what we are tasked with. If we can acquire large data sets and that capture that wide range of variability and context, that will obviously allow for better generalizability. So there's a big task of work to be done there in terms of collection of data. But then there's also a huge aspect to all of the data that I've mentioned today, and that's pre-processing. So before we touch our data with any sort of analytic tool, how it is pre-processed is crucial. And there's no one size fits all, much as it would be nice if there was, but there really isn't. And we have to think and adapt to the different objectives or protocol of each study to decide on what we should do with our data. So again, our data can't exist in a vacuum. We can't analyze our data in a vacuum. There must be constant collaboration and communication between the domain expert in ag and the AI researcher. And then the final example I'll speak to are some examples from the food research team in Vista Milk, and where some of the work that's been done by Vista Milk researchers is contributing to this sort of happy marriage of AI and ag. So there's a lot of work within Vista Milk that is based on analysis of spectral data, typically mid-infrared spectral data, but not exclusively. For example, in the Tyndall Institute in University College Cork, there's a lot of work on developing surface enhanced Raman spectra. So spectra or using spectra within the context of AI and ag is a key focus of many of the researchers in Vista Milk. And here I'm going to focus mostly on milk spectral data and typically mid-infrared spectral data. But just to speak to sort of the broader picture, you know, we can get spectral data from grass right through to milk for using it to think about the development of products, and also using spectral data, for example, to help again assess that animal welfare piece. What we can assess, it's looking promising. There's been a lot of work done in terms of assessing animals' body condition score based on spectral data from their milk. So the ubiquity, the cost effectiveness of acquiring spectral data and the rich source of information that we can get from it is hugely promising. But the task is that we have to pass it through some sort of models, for example, to help us in terms of breeding. So again, there's some work within Vista Milk looking at breeding for nitrogen use efficiency, or we can use the information for the development of products or an industry and so on. So the examples I'll pull on here are predicting milk traits from MIR, mid-infrared spectral data. And by milk traits, that means everything from fats and proteins within a milk sample, but also technological traits. So what happens in practice is obviously the cow gets milked, and a sample of that milk gets sent off to a physical lab, like a real scientist lab, where they put us through a set of what we call gold standard tests. And that allows us to quantify, for example, the level of a bunch of proteins within that sample. This is really accurate, but it's really expensive, it's very slow, and it's really not scalable or a valid way of doing this at scale. Alternatively, we can take another sample of that milk and pass it through this machine here, which is a mid-infrared spectrometer. And what that will give us is a whole bunch of spectral data. So here there's lots of spectra, there's lots of different samples in this image, but across a whole bunch of different wavelengths, and we can get, for example, the absorbance level. And the information in these spectra tells us lots of things about, for example, the different levels of proteins in that milk. So what we get from the spectra is it can be high dimensional data, so around across typically about 1,000 plus wavelengths, we can get the absorbance, for example, at that. And really our task is this red arrow here. Can we learn, can we use data analytic type methods to learn or understand the relationship between what we can infer from the spectra and what that tells us about the actual levels of the protein? Because if we could do this route where we just pass our samples quickly and cheaply through an MIR and in a non-destructive manner to predict the levels of proteins, for example, it will help us both in terms of farmers getting paid for the milk, but also looking towards the processors in terms of where that milk goes. So a really nice aspect that came through the Vista Milk community was a large endeavour led by Maria Frizerin and Alessandro Casa, so again a Chagos researcher and an AI researcher, and they put together what we call the MIR data competition. So this was where they took a data set from Vista Milk, they released it to the wider world and asked researchers to come up with ways to predict traits from the spectral data. And it resulted in this publication, which is a really nice sort of story or walk through the different approaches that all of this mix of researchers from across the world took to answering the questions of trying to predict these traits from the spectral data. So within the paper, it's a really nice, I think, snapshot of AI and ag, if you wish, because all of the different contributors took different approaches to this problem. So we had, for example, people trying to predict the levels of casein in milk samples, and they used a sparse, partially squares type approach. So these red bars indicate the wavelengths that were important. Or, for example, down here on the bottom is an example, another researcher was trying to predict pH from the MIR spectra, and they took a functional data analysis approach. So many different methods, no one size fits all, and pros and cons to all of them. But we still have a lot of work to do. So for example, I think this paper is a really nice example of the bringing together of lots of different methods from across the spectrum of AI methodology, from the computer science and machine learning into the statistical approaches. But we're far from done, and I think I set that tone probably at the start. We need to go beyond point prediction. So we've done a lot of work on predicting things, whether it's milk traits or sward composition or whatever that is. But there's more to prediction than point prediction, and we really need to worry about uncertainty if we're going to advance both the field of AI and the field of ag, and importantly, that interaction. So uncertainty uncertainty is a broad word, but really what we mean here is there's more to a prediction than just a single answer. There's a lot of uncertainty under that, through the collection of data, through the models that have been used, through runtimes and convergence aspects. So we need to build or importantly communicate the uncertainty in that to the end user, the farmer, the decision maker, the processor. So there is some work within Vista Milk that's heading in that direction. So for example, Simon Urbas here in UCD is very much currently working on developing Bayesian probabilistic methods to try and do these predictions from spectral data, but not jumping too far away from those well-known and well-utilized tools, for example, like partial least squares that many of you may have heard of. So here's an example. Simon was working on predicting the heat stability of those milk samples from the MIR spectra. Milk stability is extremely important in the processing process for infant milk formula. So here in the plot, we have a bunch of observations. So we have 20 milk samples, if you want to think of it that way. The little black circle here is the true value of the heat stability measure that was arrived at in the lab. And the little red crosses throughout these plots are the results for the prediction from partial least squares, which is very much sort of the typical approach to analysing these types of data. The little asterisk then is the predicted value under our Bayesian probabilistic partial least squares. But really the important piece here is the vertical bar, not the circles or the crosses or the asterisks. It's the uncertainty around those predictions that is much more informative to a decision maker than the point value itself. So whether the length of that interval is worrying, or maybe its position, sometimes, whether it includes 0 or not can be an important thing to worry about. But the point here being that we need to look at more than just root mean squared errors or point estimates. We really need to start worrying and building in uncertainty into how we collect our data and build our models and communicate the answers. So you can see in some cases there's not much difference. If anything, there's not at all. And in some cases, the point estimate for partial least squares is better, but we have no uncertainty associated with it. And then in other cases, for example, the partial least squares does very poorly. Heat stability is a well-predicted measure, though, or trait, one that's a little more challenging to typically predict from these MIR spectra is urea concentration. And here is a similar plot across a number of observations or samples of milk, and this would be the urea concentration. So again, the circles are the truths from the lab, the red crosses are PLS, and then we have our Bayesian estimates in the stars. But importantly, again, these broad prediction intervals. So you can see PLS does very poorly here. There's the probabilistic model here, and some of the regularization we put in really helps in terms of our predictions capturing or at least being closer to the truth. But again, the key point here is that the uncertainty, those 95% prediction intervals, are a key part to worry about. Another key part to worry about is that all of these traits, nothing exists in isolation. So urea and fat and protein, these are all within the same milk sample. So there's dependency between these traits. And another aspect, say, of the work that Simon is doing is accounting for that dependency within the model. So rather than independently predicting urea and fat and protein concentration, we can build, once we have a probabilistic model, we have the framework to build and develop and add in dependencies and appropriately model that in the data. So here we can see this is a heat map that's again sort of showing us wavelengths that are important and are telling us, are giving us a lot of information in this prediction process. So uncertainty is important, but also, we still have a lot of work to do beyond point prediction, and that's around explainability. So more and more we need to be able to explain why our methods are working, and there's a very strong and large volume of work within Vista Milk that tackles this explainable AI, largely led by Mark Keane here in UCD, but again, you can see with collaborators, Lauren Shalou and Chagas and Owen Delaney here in UCD. So can we explain why we can predict, but can we explain to a farmer or a processor why this is the prediction? So there's a lot of work done within Vista Milk on case-based reasoning and providing farmers with novel pre-factual explanations that will allow them to, for example, forecast milk supply. And really this is to try and assist farmers in taking action to boost their future milk yield. So just to wrap up, I think this AI, I've changed it from AI in ag to AI times ag, because I think it really is an interaction. It has enabled great leaps forward in both fields by giving us fast and easy and economical ways to improve how we understand processes and help make decisions. But we have a huge, I think, responsibility and also a lot of work to do. We need to worry about robustness. It works on Irish soil. Does it work on American soil? Privacy is becoming a huge issue that really is going to have to be tackled. Fairness, societal, economic and legal issues. And some of those are very bespoke to the agriculture sector. And again, it has to be that interaction that needs to be teased out in order to move those forward. And we need to develop the skill sets. So right back to that foundational research, we need to develop people and skills so that we're ready to develop methods for the data types that we haven't even yet imagined or seen. But we also can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to still worry about the traditional old aspects such as experimental design and all of the problems that come with having observational data. If you don't have randomization, we really need to worry about the conclusions or the way we're communicating the conclusions we're drawing. And if we want our methods to be used in the future of ag to the AI community, we really need to assure users of their validness, whether that's through the explainability piece, but also through reproducibility and generalizability. So I'm stealing here from Professor Michael Jordan in Berkeley. He's a professor of computer science and statistics in Berkeley. And he argues, and I would also argue, that we don't yet have artificial intelligence. We have augmented intelligence, and artificial intelligence is still aspirational. But that's not bad news. That's great news for us. It means there's lots of interesting and impactful work to be done, and we're going to hear lots of that today. So with that, I'll conclude. As I say, you're all very welcome to the event, and really looking forward to an excellent day ahead. Everything from sword structure to robots, to, again, sensors and breeding, health and food, and right through to analysing livestock. So thanks very much for joining us today. And with that, I'll pass to Agnieszka, who's going to chair this session.
Good morning and welcome to the first session of our masterclass. My name is Agnieszka Konkolewska and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Vista Milk working on pasture breeding. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Professor Jerome Bindelle from University of Liege. His work is focused on the link between nutrition and intestinal health in pigs and humans, but also on grazing management and decision support tools for farmers. Today we will hear more about remote sensing of sward structure and biomass for precision grazing. Professor Bindelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Agnieszka. I will start sharing my screen so you can see my presentation. I just that. All right. So is everything okay from your side?
Everything is great.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Agnieszka. So thank you for the introduction. So I'm Jerome Bindelle from the University of Liege in Belgium, and on behalf of my co-authors, I would like to express my gratitude because I feel very honored for being invited by the organizers of this masterclass to have the opportunity to share our views on these very interesting topics, which is artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence applied to something that is very dear to us, which is grazing management, and more specifically sward structure and biomass. I also would like to present my apologies for my voice today, because I'm actually recovering from a flu that hit me in the past days. So I hope that you guys will understand me well, despite this little problem that I have today. I'm pretty sure that I'm pleading in front of a convinced audience today, but still I cannot start my presentation without a little reminder about the importance of grasslands covering significant areas in the world and being at the heart of the most criticized, but as well the most sensitive livestock farming systems. So it is very important to manage them well, as we are all convinced, I suppose. As you know, field methods, and Claire just before me showed some examples of that. Field methods are really time-consuming, and almost since they appeared, remote sensing technologies have been seen have been seen by past scientists as alternatives to provide interesting indicators for management. So in this context, the fast development of satellite imagery, but also unmanned aerial systems, which we usually call drones, as you know, seem to enable them as possible tools for decision-making to support grazing management. So this is a possible way to improve the way we can manage pastures, but to do that, we need really to integrate knowledge between different types of scientists. On the one hand, we have pasture scientists, and on the other, we have remote sensing scientists, but also data scientists. So we really need to build these bridges between expertise, and I think the need to build these bridges between different types of expertise is probably highlighted by what I understand from the diversity of the audience that we have today in this Vista Milk Masterclass. So in the overview that I will be presenting today, if you're a pasture or an animal scientist, you will have maybe to wait for the second part of my presentation to learn some new stuff. But if you are more from the remote sensing science or from the data analysis, the first part might take you a little bit out of your comfort zone, and you will have to wait for the second part to be more in your comfort zone. But I hope that all of you will enjoy 100% of the presentation today. So I will start maybe with some fundamental, and that might be reminders to most of you. So let me start with the definition of what grazing is. So grazing is defined as the action of an herbivore to feed on a growing herbage. So this looks like a pretty simple definition, but actually behind this definition hides very complex interactions between the plant and the animal. These can be seen as two separate compartments of the whole pastoral ecosystem. And so the art of grazing management, and I call it an art on purpose, lies in making sure that both the plant and the animal requirements are met when this event of grazing takes place. So, excuse me, we will start with the perspective of the plant on this grazing, which can be seen, as you see on this image, as the sudden reduction for the plant in the above ground foliage. Thus, this implies a reduction in the capacity of the plant to capture sunlight for photosynthesis, because we all know that leaves from those plants, they are made for that, right? So from the perspective of the plant, the management, the grazing management should be oriented towards controlling or maintaining, even after a defoliation, the ability of the plant to intercept light quite efficiently. So from a grazing management perspective, usual targets would recommend grazing to be initiated when the grass sward reaches something like a light interception of about 95%. Whether such targets are also grazing target recommendations are set also for light interception after defoliation is another story. So usually we have targets before grazing, but we don't have that specific targets after defoliation. Among the different traits that will characterize the sward structure, so its height, the leaf-stem ratio, the ground cover, the bulk density, the leaf area index, which is represented here on this image, which means actually the total area of leaves per unit of ground area, is actually very critical, because this leaf area index is the one that has a positive relationship with the ability of the plant to intercept sunlight and thus to provide energy for the plant, as we saw on the previous slide. So grazing management would require to measure LAE, make sure that LAI, to make sure that we can manage this ability of the plant to intercept sunlight. But actually in the field, it's very hard to do that. So it's not an easy task. So usually grazing management will require to measure other indicators that have an indirect relationship with LAI, with leaf area index. And so we will use other proxies that are easier to monitor from the plant perspective. For example, flipping the vegetation and measuring biomass, as shown here on the left-hand side of the figure, might be such a method to make a connection, to establish a relationship between LAI and biomass. But this method is also time-consuming and it's destructive. So several non-destructive alternatives have been proposed to measure these parameters of the vegetation, and they are more practical to use. For example, the very successful rising plate meter, and I guess in Ireland, many farmers use this kind of equipment, which here it's a homemade rising plate meter, but I'm sure that in Ireland, you know, the ones that are connected to a GPS, so which allows you to also have location of the different measurements that you can make. So from this rising plate meter, you can derive information on the biomass that is available on your pasture. Then if we want to measure another parameter of the swarm, another structural parameter would be the sward height, which is measured by a sward stick. It's also a non-destructive tool, and it also can be spatialized by putting a GPS on such a sward stick. But both the use of a sward stick or a rising plate meter remains still a bit time-consuming, because you have to walk on your paddocks and measure the grass height, and it requires an operator to do that. And so it will take a very long time if you want to cover the whole area that you want to offer to your cows to graze. Capturing light is not the only factor for the plant. There's a whole balance between the production of new leaves, the senescence of older leaves, the storage, the mobilization of energy reserves. And so assessing grazing condition of a pasture is not only about how much biomass or what structure that to be grazed sward should have for the plant, but also how much you should leave after a grazing event, because this will determine for how long you will have to ideally prevent these grass to be grazed so it is allowed to recover properly before experiencing a new defoliation. So saying that will take me to the second component of the grazing, because it's the animal, so the perspective of the animal. So from the perspective of the animal, grazing is a multi-scale process that involves a combination of one-time choices, which are very confined to the level of an individual bite on a specific feeding station, to larger movements of the animals across a whole paddock. So animals that actually don't see the vegetation as a whole, but we don't know how they see it, but we can assume that they rather see a vegetation as a multitude of biting opportunities. So the key questions for the animals seem to be, among these variety of bite opportunities, which one should I choose? Which one would be the most interesting for me to take now, and which one should I take later on? And we think that the animal sees the grazing process in this way, because when we look at grazing animals, we see grazing herbivores, we see that the major limitation that they might experience to fulfill their daily feed requirements for our domestic animals, but also, I guess, for the grazing white rabbit from Alice in Wonderland, as displayed here, is this major limitation is usually set as the time that they have to collect their daily forage allowance through tens of thousands of individual bites. So it really takes a lot of time for a grazing herbivore to collect the whole forage on the paddock. So this process should be, from the animal perspective, as efficient as possible. And interestingly, some recent works from our colleagues from Brazil, from Paulo Carvalho's group, showed that for each grass species, we can there exists a sward height that helps the animal maximizing its short-term intake rate, as displayed here. So if you plot the changes in short-term intake rates of grazing ruminants, for example, cattle, let's say cattle, against the pasture height measured through a sward stick, you can see that you have usually a bell-shaped curve, and these bell-shaped curves allows you to identify a point where the animal has the sward height that provides him with the best opportunity for maximizing the short-term intake rate. So there's an ideal structure that helps the animal grazing the most efficiently that is possible for that animal, meaning that allows the animal to eat as much forage as possible in the smallest amount of time possible. Now let us think about this question of why is there a need to specialize information on the sward structure and also on the sward biomass. So I read in a paper of one of your colleagues, I guess, Murphy and his colleagues, that the coefficient or variation in the Irish paddocks in terms of, I guess it was a biomass, but maybe sward height, was as high as 70%. So this means that across a paddock, you will have definitely a high variation in terms of the different attributes of that sward. So this actually originates from the fact that grazed grasslands are, by essence, they are heterogeneous, just because of the grazing. Of course, this one is not an Irish pasture, it's the Pampa in Brazil, so it's highly heterogeneous, but it's just to illustrate my speech today. And here, when I talk about heterogeneity, I'm talking about the heterogeneity in the sense of the spatial variability of grassland characteristics, for example, the sward height. So why are grazed grassland necessarily heterogeneous? Because animals are selective. So they look for specific plant species. They look, when they have found a plant species that they would like to eat, they will choose on that plant species specific plant parts for a given species. And also they might look for a specific species, also for specific plant structures that allow them to optimize their intake rates, as discussed before, so in the previous slides. So this is one reason why grazed grasslands will become heterogeneous, because of the action of the animals. Moreover, if the animals, they will take one bite on one plant in a couple of seconds, it might take 1 or 2 seconds, no more. For the plant to recover from that bite, that will take several weeks or days or weeks. So what happens is that the herbivores can only graze a small portion of the whole grazable areas that they are offered to graze. And so the consequence of that is that when you put animals on a pasture, they will turn the grazed pasture into a vegetation with patches of different regrowth stages. And so the structure will always be heterogeneous after when you put animals to graze on a pasture. And so we might ask ourselves if heterogeneity is always a bad thing. But interestingly, when you look at these simulations from a work of Arthur Pontes-Prates, we see that heterogeneity is not always a bad thing. So in some conditions, it can enhance the functional response, here the intake rate of the animals, and minimize grazing time by these animals, as shown on this figure. And it works actually by providing the animals with better or more efficient grazing opportunities. So they are allowed to find on that pasture patches with the right sward height that allows them to maximize their intake rate. So monitoring the vegetation at a high frequency, for example, with a drone, has the potential not only to identify and keep targets sward height, but also to address the degree of heterogeneity. So we can talk here about sward height variation to make it simple, and use this information for management. So this will now take me to the second part of today's speech, which is the idea of using now remote sensing to monitor these grazing conditions that we discussed a little bit above. So remote sensing can be used for the characterization of vegetation in various contexts. So grassland have been tackled in various ways, and we can differentiate according to basically 4 factors. So which vegetation traits we want to identify, the sensors, and I say sensors with an S that can be used, the platform that is onboarding the sensors, and also the extension of the area to characterize that we want to monitor, and also the grain factor. And I should add a 5th factor, and which is of your interest today, which would be the data processing method that can be used to interpret the remote sense data that has been acquired and transform it into a usable information. But we will discuss about that a little bit later. So in terms of platform, on one side of the gradients, here on the right-hand side, we have satellite remote sensing that can have global coverage at a very low cost for the end user, because usually you don't have to pay to receive the images, at least for some constellations. Some constellations are free of use. Of course, you will need to pay to process the data, because there's always a cost somewhere. The spatial resolution ranges from 10 to 30 meters for these free of charge constellations, but you can have constellation with a narrower spatial resolution. In terms of orbit periods, revisits, which meaning by the frequency at which you can acquire new information on a specific paddock, will be done every 5 to 10 days. Then you have an in-between solution, which would be airborne remote sensing. And finally, the drones that can cover areas that are still relevant. There are smaller areas, of course, than satellite imagery, but they can cover areas that are still relevant from a grazing management perspective, meaning, in one single survey, they can cover areas as large as 10 hectares. And they can also provide very high spatial resolution data under 10 centimeters, which is actually highly relevant from a plant-animal interface perspective, because then you get to the resolution of the bite, as shown here on this figure. Also, revisit of a paddock by the remote sensing device can be done when you actually decide it, as long as the weather conditions allow it, of course. So regarding the sensors, there are several kinds of sensors that are or can be used. So you have the hyperspectral LiDAR or radar data that are kind of silver bullets. If you want to go to either spectral characterization or build 3-dimension models of the sward structure. But many papers that I've gone through actually focus more on more passive sensors, using sometimes even off-the-shelf cameras, as shown on the left-hand side here on the image. So red, green, blue cameras, just like the ones you used to have when you didn't have a cell phone to take pictures. Also, near-infrared multi-spectral cameras are often used. So these sensors, they display very strong differences in terms of resolution, costs, and ease of use. For example, RGB cameras, they can have a very high spatial resolution, but they have a very lower quality in terms of spectral information. Hyperspectral cameras, on the other side, they can sense a large portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. They can range from lower than 400 nanometers to over 1,500 nanometers, meaning to UV and from UVs to near infrared spectrum, with a very high spectral resolution, meaning that the band overlap is very low. But they have a lower, these hyperspectral cameras, they have a lower spatial resolution. And these multispectral cameras here in the middle, they're in the middle because they can be seen also as an in-between solution. So whatever the platform that you use, and whatever the sensor that you put on that platform, so whether it's a drone with multispectral camera or whether you're using satellite data with radar imagery, they will yield you with raw data that you must then convert into useful information. And from a grading management perspective, I suppose that you have guessed what I consider as useful information. It's put here below. So leaf area index, information on biomass, on grass height, and some people try even to go to grass quality as well. So for this, we can distinguish between two major approaches. So the first one would be to calculate or to derive vegetation indices. And so here, and the other one would be to try to derive a 3D model of the vegetation surface as which is stated here as point clouds. And then once you have that, you rasterize the data and you apply data processing methods that might be simple multiple regression or more sophisticated machine learning algorithms that you probably know better than I do, because I'm actually not a data scientist, but more a pasture scientist, as you might have guessed. So for those who are not familiar with the concept, vegetation indices are actually combinations of surface reflectance at 2 or sometimes more wavelengths that can range from the UV, so below 380 nanometers, to the infrared, so above 850 nanometers of wavelength. So these vegetation indices, they are designed to highlight a specific property of the vegetation in one single value. So the most famous one that you probably all heard of already is the NDVI, which combines reflectance in the red, which is absorbed by an active vegetation, just to make photosynthesis, of course, and the near infrared, which is strongly reflected by this active vegetation, because otherwise that plant would just overheat and just burn. So this is one thing that is done with this spectral information. And then on the other side, on the other side of the spectrum, we can have the derivation of 3D model. So for example, imaging sensors just like our RGB cameras can allow us to derive these 3D models by using specific softwares that are based on structure from motion photogrammetry. And so the idea is simply doing the same thing your brain does with two eyes that look at the same scenery. So the idea is to be the very slightly different perspective from both of your eyes allows you to reconstruct the third dimension. So the depth of the image that you are looking at. And so by assembling several images with a strong overlap of the same paddock, you can rebuild a 3D model of the sward canopy. And so if you combine this to a 3D model of the ground level, you can derive actually a digital sward height. So by making the difference between the ground level model and the sward canopy level, you can have your actual sward height thanks to that. And this allows you to derive this information at an unprecedented spatial resolution and also over areas beyond comparison with what you can do just going on the field with your sward stick, as you saw on one of the slides before. LiDAR or radar data, they can also provide you with such 3D models. And one big advantage of LiDAR or radar data is that by changing the wavelength of the radiation, they can go through different at different depths within a vegetation. So they can provide you with information on the inner structure of the vegetation. And also the radiation, at least for radar, can be polarized. And so by polarizing the radiation and seeing how this polarized radiation is reflected, you can also have additional information on the surface that is reflecting the signal, so allow you to go deeper into in further details into information, for example, on the quality of the grass that is hit by this radiation. So, excuse me, the quality of such 3D models is commonly evaluated through simple linear regression with a reference sward height. So field reference is always used to evaluate the quality of such 3D models. So they can yield R-squares of about 70% and sometimes even higher. So even when you use a low-cost commercial drone sold for the general public, just like you can go in one of your stores. I don't know the stores in Ireland, but I wouldn't say any store. I don't want to make commercials today, advertisement today. So let's say you go in any store, you buy off-the-shelf drone that is usually used by the general public. With such drones, you can already reach very acceptable resolutions. Interestingly here, what you see here on this slide is that using the same database, we observed that the average sward height measured at the scale of plots was better predicted than point sward height measurements. And we ascribe this to the fact that there's an increased risk of discrepancy in the location between the reference point, which you need to very accurately locate on the field, and the modeled height. And of course, this discrepancy between the accurate location of the reference point is reduced when you work at the paddock, at the experimental plot or the paddock level. And looking at this interesting work that was done by Hiroyuki Obanawa and his colleagues, we can see that later point clouds really stand out in terms of quality of prediction of sward height with almost zero bias. Of course, the surface to motion photogrammetry provides very decent results, but the LiDAR is, I would say, one step higher than this surface to motion photogrammetry. So drone images can be used to model also other structural traits like sward biomass or leaf area index, generally through the use of various modeling methods, which sometimes include machine learning. Such modeling approaches usually integrate spectral information, okay, through vegetation indices. And you can also acquire these vegetation indices by using specific spectral information also from basic RGB sensors, although the resolution would be a bit lower because you have a higher band overlap when you use just RGB sensors to do calculate vegetation index. So here, once again, the performances that you see here on this slide are quite decent, I would say. So you have R-squares of about 70% for LAE or chlorophyll content, but some researchers, like colleagues from Finland, they could reach for dry matter yields R-squares of as high as 96%. So, so working with satellite images now. So working with satellite images for grass pasture is actually much older than working with drones for grass pastures. And it has shown to be very useful. And I guess the oldest work that I found in the literature that explained that related some work on grass pasture with satellite imagery dates back to 1982. I was born, but I wasn't very old by then. So just to tell you that it's nothing new, I guess. And so, but what I'm going to show you today is I'm going to show you some pieces of work that we recently did using Sentinel data. This is why I took these images from the European Space Agency. So for those who are not familiar with Sentinel, I would consider myself as not very familiar with Sentinel as well. So I'm just putting you at the same page as I am. So Sentinel-1 is a polar orbiting all-weather day and night radar sensor. So you have two satellites that orbit around the Earth and that take images with a revisit frequency, I guess, of about 5 days. And then we have Sentinel-2, which is same kind of mission, but the sensors that is on the satellite is different. It's a multi-spectral sensor with 13 type of bands. So we took these images from Sentinel-2 and Sentinel-1. We've merged these images in a database with field observation of compressed swarm heights. So these compressed swarm heights are actually rising plate meter data that are geolocated. And we mix that as well with weather data here. It's here, the weather data. And then we fed that to machine learning algorithms, and we asked them to predict and validate the field measurements from those Sentinel data corrected by the meteorological data. Obviously, it's a bit more complicated than that, but the principle is there. So in terms of satellite data, what did we use? So we used the C-band radar data from Sentinel-1 here, okay, which is a specific wavelength from these radar images. And we used also the 13 spectral bands of Sentinel-2. We cleaned the database. So namely, you have to remove the cloudy days, you have to apply atmospheric condition corrections, etc. And then you have to apply a grid to resample all the images at the same size, which was a pixel of 10 by 10 meters that we used to resample the images, and also to select the pixels for which we had information on compressed swarm height on the field. And then we merge everything into one single database with the meteorological data. We still had to tackle one issue, is the fact that you actually don't know when you will have a visit of a Sentinel satellite above the paddock that you're measuring on the field. So we had to average, because the average revisit frequency of Sentinel-1 and 2 was about 10 days. So in theory, it's about every 5 days. But since you have cloudy days, and I guess you have even more cloudy days in Ireland than you have in Belgium, this is why Ireland is so green. So that's your luck, I would say. So we had to apply a 10 days time window, a 10-day time window to make sure that we could ascribe field measurement to a specific image from Sentinel. And from the Sentinel data, we also applied several transformation on the variables. So square, log, cubic, exponential function, and we split the database in two. So one for the calibration and one for the training here, and one for the validation. And then we threw everything in the mouth of 142 machine learning algorithms. And from these algorithms, some performed really poorly, but others performed really well. And so 4 models stood out with RMSE of independent validation of less than 2 centimeters, talking about the value of the predicted compressed sward height at the pixel level. So the 10 by 10 meters pixel. So it was, one of these models was a cubist model, the other one was a GLMNet, another was a neural network algorithm, and the last one was a random forest-based model. So these models allowed us to explore how we could use them at the level of the whole Walloon region, which is the one region in the southern part of Belgium, which covers a bit more than half of the country. And so how we could use those models to develop decision support tools for farmers. And it also allowed us to identify some key issues that still needed to be dealt with before we could offer a decent service to the farmers using just these algorithms for prediction of compressed sward height. One of these issues is the revisit frequency of about every 10 days. And sometimes also cloud cover can result in not having single images for more than 1 month on one specific paddock. So one solution could be to extrapolate values from nearby pixels, or the other solution could also be to combine this satellite imagery with mechanistic transplant modeling to provide, in any case, a prediction to the farmers about the state of their pastures. Another key issue, and I guess Claire talked a little bit about that as well, at least from, I think she wanted to touch that a little bit, is the transferability of the prediction algorithms. So, and this, whatever the sensor. So the idea is to overcome the site dependencies. So the regression or the machine learning models, they are really good and promising, but to be really useful in practice, they must be able to predict properly the values over fields that they have, on which they haven't really been tested. And so, so they can be applied in a wider range of conditions. For example, if I take this slide again, you can see that there are temporal variations in the ratio of photosynthetically active biomass and the dead biomass on a field or in a vegetation. And so this strongly impacts the quality of prediction equations that are derived from spectral data. You can see that on this slide, for example, when you look at the R-square here. So with the ongoing season, you see that actually the quality of the prediction is decreasing. Okay, so we need to tackle that. We need to be able to have models that are able to predict properly across the whole season. And also, one option to tackle that could be also to ask the farmer to provide some information. So to have a more tailored service to the specific condition on the farm, for example, providing information on soil characteristic, floristic composition of the vegetation, etc. Another interesting question was, what kind of information should we provide to the farmer? Are pasture characteristics averaged at the pasture level interesting for the farmers, or is it interesting for the farmers to have pixel level information, and so to be able to grasp some insights on the heterogeneity of the paddock that he's actually or she is actually managing. If we want to go to discuss the monitoring of the heterogeneity from the perspective of the animal grazing process, then we are not sure that you can do that with satellite imagery, because actually the size of the pixel is too big to be relevant, and the revisit frequency of the satellites is too low to be relevant from the functional interaction between the animal and the vegetation. And so maybe to do that, that might be dealt with by drone imagery. And then we can think also of getting a little bit further. So if we are facing with complex multi-specific vegetation, as here it's the Pampa in southern Brazil, stems can represent a barrier to bite depth. And so bite mass is more related to just lamina or regrowth length than simply the sward height. And so working with this LiDAR or radar data to have information on the internal three-dimensional structure of the vegetation might be very interesting from a grazing management perspective, in addition to the obvious horizontal distribution of plants and patches and heights. So if we combine multi-temporal drone-based or satellite imagery with other types of tools, just like sensors that you discussed before, mentioning the work of Lucille Riabov, you can start thinking of enabling innovative grazing practices with a stocking method that would be able to smartly use the heterogeneity of pastures that I think now you agree with, that it's unescapable, the fact that we have heterogeneity, and we can try to actually help us with these, that these methods can help us to actually properly manage this heterogeneity. One example of how that could be used was tested by our colleagues in Brazil. So they actually simulated how an accurate specialized monitoring of sward height could help grazing management in always providing the animals with an ideal structure in terms of short-term intake rate. And they did that with grazing sheep, but of course the concept can be applied to grazing cattle as well. So what they did is that the pasture was monitored to maintain sward height between 12 and 18 centimeters as grazing targets, which were identified for the species they were working on. And I guess it was Lolium multiflorum, Italian ryegrass. So these targets were identified as the ones that were maximizing the short-term intake rate of the animals. So when they identified areas with a paddock that was lower than 12 centimeters, that one was specifically deferred from grazing until monitoring indicated that the regrowth reached the right sward height again. And when the vegetation was higher than 18 centimeters, then a specific cut was applied. And so if you start thinking of combining all these technologies, then you can dream, or maybe it's a nightmare to some of you, but you can dream of having more flexible, multi-sensor based grazing management that actually help you in providing a pastoral environment that is beneficial for your animals. That's the key point that we have to think of, and that would be always the target that we should keep in our mind for applying these technologies. And so just to let you reflect a little bit on that, so I just found this interesting image from, I think it was made something like 5 years ago. It's a hype, Gartner curves on all these technologies in agriculture, these new technologies in agriculture. And I guess that when we look at satellite imagery, we are getting close to a given maturity. But when we talk about deep learning, big data, drones, we're still in the middle of the curve, in the peak of inflation or in the disillusion part of the curve. But I guess as scientists, we don't have to be very worried about that, but we need, our role is to clarify what can be actually expected from those technologies and what is an exaggerated expectation of that. And more importantly, to show to grazers how they can use this to have a more sustainable management of the pastoral ecosystem that is, I guess, so dear to all of us. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'm really sorry I overpassed my time a little bit, but I will be very happy to take the questions if you have some questions.
Thank you, Jerome. So if anyone would have questions, please put them in the Q&A box.
Sharing my screen. Let me just.
So Jerome, I would have first question for you. In your opinion, how easily can the models be used in new regions or countries? Because from what you have presented, sometimes you can get very accurate results for a predictive model in one site, but how do you see them? How can you transfer this knowledge to another region?
So the question is how the models that are developed in one region could be transferred to another region, right?
Yes.
That's a key question. Some people, I'm less familiar with satellite imagery for that topic, but from drone images, some people showed that just by taking a couple, and by a couple, I mean more than 10 field measurements could help to kind of recalibrate the algorithms that have been used to in another place to be used to predict the sward structure in a new field. So I guess this is one way forward. And I guess another way forward would be to aggregate as much information as possible to be able to actually choose between maybe key species in a paddock. For example, let's say you have a ryegrass-based paddock, then you say, okay, you tick that. And then when you use prediction algorithm, those algorithms would actually be more adapted to the composition of the pasture that you are working on. So I guess thinking of having one algorithm that can go through everything is impossible. So we need to always keep that in mind. And a big effort should be made, I guess, to standardizing the way we acquire information and putting databases together to be able to develop those more, I wouldn't say universal because they will never be universal, but this universal database to have more locally adapted prediction algorithms and models.
Yeah, thank you. So on the topic of the data management, do you know how long is the data from the Sentinel being kept or retained?
I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know. No, I can't answer that question. No, I prefer not to say something wrong. So the information is very easily accessible, and I mean, it's the European Space Agency, so I suppose that on their website they might provide you with this information. But the information that we used had been acquired several years ago before we started this work. So I guess it should be a couple of years, but I don't know for how long.
Thank you. I'm looking into the chat. We don't have any questions here for now, but I've got a question from Lucille. How do you plan to combine vegetation mapping with grazing behavior obtained from embedded sensors?
I think if you plan to do that, you need to go, I would say, to go through a grazing model. So a model that combines so you need to use a model that will explain. I'm sorry, because I think slowly today. So some kind of mechanistic grazing model where the animal is clearly identified in terms of behavior, how that animal behaves in front of a vegetation of a specific structure, for example. So whether that animal will graze at a specific rate, whether that animal will be selecting structure of a specific height instead of others. So through this kind of model, you can combine information from the vegetation that you measure through a drone or a satellite, and the behavior of the animal. But I think it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that if you don't spatialize the information on the vegetation, because the behavior of the animal and what you want to measure with sensors is actually driven by the fact that the animal will change its behavior because the grazing opportunities are changing on the vegetation, and so the animal will explore more some parts of the paddock because that animal considers that this part of the paddock provides better grazing opportunities, etc. So it's very important to say that if you want to combine sensors from data from sensors on animals with data acquired on the vegetation, that makes sense only if you do that, if you spatialize the information on the vegetation and you do that in a spatialized grazing model.
Thank you very much. I think in the interest of time, we will move to our next speaker. Thank you again, Jerome. And if anyone has questions for you, I hope that they can email you with them.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Agnieszka.
Our next speaker is Dr. Marek Kraft of the Faculty of Control, Robotics and Electrical Engineering of the Poznan University of Technology. So Marek has been working for over 10 years in the field of image processing, machine learning, and robotics. And today he will describe recent advances in autonomization of fiber hemp cultivation using AI-assisted agricultural robots. So Marek, welcome to our virtual stage.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for the invitation. That's the first thing to say, because I think it's kind of unusual for me to be in a crowd of experts that's mostly concerned with agriculture. Let me share my screen. Hope you can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so let's start then. My name is Marek Kraft, and like Agnieszka was so kind to introduce, I'll talk about autonomization of fiber hemp cultivation using AI-assisted methods with robots. First, a few words about where I come from. I come from Poznan University of Technology in Poznan, Poland. I'm with the Institute of Robotics and Machine Intelligence, and specifically Computer Vision Lab. And we as an institute in our research focus on intelligent autonomous machines for different purposes. Like, and in case for those machines to perform those tasks, we do with perception, planning, and also action. Everything with the extensive use of the so-called AI. Basically, it's still supervised machine learning, albeit more advanced. And as you can see, we deal with all kinds of tasks and robots, like underground structure exploration using legged robots, help with tedious manual tasks using this mobile robot that's actually also equipped with 2 hands, but also autonomous vehicles, because from our point of view, they're also robots. They're basically robots on wheels. We work with a range of sensors from cameras, depth cameras, through LiDARs, thermal data. And we also try to mount our sensors on different devices, like the robots I've shown you, but also on drones. Here's an excerpt from our recent work on the assessment of damage that was caused by wild animals to cornfields in Poland. It's useful from the point of view of insurance. But we also do a lot of other things like land cover segmentation, plant health assessment, etc., etc. Generally, we try to do this using onboard processing of the gathered data to provide the information that's useful from the point of view of the agriculture. I also decided to include this slide because we also performed some work on pedestrian monitoring in terms of counting and the behavior analysis for traffic management, but we were recently contacted by someone who was interested in adopting those methods to actually monitor the behaviors of grazing animals. So that might be of interest to you in terms of what we do. This work, the results that I'm presenting, were mostly a result of a funded project, which was realized by a consortium So aside from us, there's our consortium leader, which is the Invebit company, which is basically a high-tech software house with vast experience in a range of projects, ranging from energy systems like virtual power plants, hydrogen energy, robotics in the traditional sense, not agricultural. They did a notable part of the software for a caretaker robot that's also AI powered. A lot of Internet of Things projects. One of them was, for example, beehive monitoring that was using a range of sensors to monitor the behavior of bees and the well-being of bees. Smart cities, such as public space monitoring, that's actually how we got in touch, but they're also very active in the field of e-agriculture, also agriculture robotics, like this project, but they also recently won a grant for apple picking robots. So kind of say that they're also specialized in this field. Since we are more IT related, and so is our consortium leader, we also obviously needed some expertise in the agriculture side of things. And our third partner, the final partner, is the Institute of National Fibers and Medicinal Plants, which is conveniently also located in Poznan. It is a state-funded research institution that deals with all kinds of fibrous and medicinal plants, their cultivation, development of new cultivars, finding interesting uses for those plants in terms of medicine, but also in other areas of economy. And they also serve as consultants for government, and commercial companies regarding those herbal products and food products. Obviously, hemp is within the range of their interest since it's both a medicinal plant and a fibrous plant. So, with these introductions aside, what is the goal of the project and what was its motivation? So, hemp products are very useful in a variety of applications. I think this is a plant that was kind of rediscovered in recent years because it has a lot of uses, ranging from natural fibers that can be used to fabric garments, but also used in construction for isolation materials. They can be used as biofuel. They can be used as food, as a source of nutrition. They can be used to produce seed oil, but also plant oil. So they're very, very multifaceted in terms of their potential uses. And as you grow hemp in really quite a lot of applications of hemp, pollination is a really big problem. For example, if you cultivate hemp for biomass or cannabinoid content, that is oil extraction, you can get severe economical losses from the plants being pollinated. So this is also interesting from the points of view of actually selling the seed materials, because feminized seeds are very desirable. Usually you buy seeds that are really low in male seed content, right? Also, the rogue pollination is a serious problem, because even if you're not concerned with your plants being pollinated, because, for example, you grow them just for fibers, your plants might pollinate the plants on a neighboring field. So generally, it is not desirable to have male plants in your field. You try to remove them, and it's usually performed by hand. Someone walks around the field, identifies those plants, and just pulls them out. They're subsequently being burned. It's a tedious task that needs trained staff, special handling, and special arrangement of crops. This is sample images from the field with male plants and female plants. Male plant here, here, and here. You can see that they can be discerned by the shape of the flowers, which is crucial. And this is also the way that we later try to recognize them. So with this in mind, we thought, hey, we could use robots for that, right? I'm a roboticist, at least in part. I deal mostly with vision processing, but I'm familiar with robots. And robots make our life easier in terms of removing those tedious tasks. So how would this robot look like? So people need access for manual plant removal, and tall plants require dense paths. We work with Henola variety of hemp, and their height is between 2 and 2.5 meters. and they're considered some of the lower varieties of hemp. So generally, you have quite dense arrangement of pads when you cultivate hemp, so that people can access those plants, that they actually see them if they need to remove those male plants. And that is obviously not optimal. So if we could make a robot operate from above, that would give us the benefit of automation, but also the added benefit of better yield in terms of better density of the plants per unit of surface of the field. So what we came up with is quite a typical arrangement for an agricultural robot. This is this inverse U-shaped arrangement that deals with the plants that are basically running below this robot. The thing that is kind of different is that this robot is big. I don't think I have seen one that's similar in dimensions, but we deal with really big plants, so that was necessary. And this mobile robot base is pretty universal. This can be used for not only the task that we had in mind, but can be adapted, for example, for spraying, or equipped with different end effectors. It can perform also other tasks. So this is something that we had in mind for this robot, and this is how it would look. But this is just the mobile robot base that's capable of moving around those constructed paths. But we also need very, very precise handling. Hemp plants are very sensitive to herbicides, so spraying a plant once we find it is not an option, because like several square meters of plants would be dead just from applying something to a plant in terms of spraying. And pulling those plants out is also not an option. We were considering that, but we've come up with something that we thought is a better solution. I'll talk about this a bit later, but in any case, we need to place an arm on the robot. As you can see, there was this also special plate envisioned in this construction so that the arm can be mounted on top. This robot arm, similar to this robot, were actually commissioned. It is not something that we did. It was actually commissioned to be put together for the purpose of this project. The robot arm has quite a big reach. It's not a typical robot arm in the sense that it doesn't have a sub-millimeter accuracy. It doesn't move very fast. But for the purpose that we wanted to, what we wanted to perform, it's perfect actually, because it's very light, it's very low cost, and it has a great reach. So the arm is generally mounted on top of the robot, and since spraying and pulling is out of question for different reasons that I mentioned before, we needed a custom special end effector, and after consulting the experts from the National Fibrous and Medicinal Plants Institute, we decided that we'll go with a gripper that will inject the herbicide directly into the plant. And this is the first prototype. It's a CAD model, basically. But this solution minimizes the use of chemicals. Basically, you need between 1 or 2 milliliters per plant. And it also facilitates very, very individual treatment so that no other plants in the field are affected, beside the ones that you want affected. So the general concept is that our robot moves around within this field using those predefined paths. And once it encounters the male plant, it can obviously detect it using the base-mounted sensors, which we envision to be RGBD cameras. Then we can roughly position the arm to align with this plant, and then the plant arm takes over control and performs some kind of visual severing to grab this plant, inject this herbicide portion, and then basically we hope the plant will be kind of neutralized or eliminated, and then the robot can move forward until it encounters another plant to be treated. So with this planning done, we thought we have everything thought out, and now it's just easy peasy. Well, maybe not easy peasy, but the planning stage was over, and we were very eager to get to work. But yeah, well, turned out not to be so easy. This is a project that was really started in difficult times. The international situation, the COVID situation, has really hit us. There's been really difficult problems with the shortage of components. So, for example, I'm still waiting for some cameras that I ordered a year and a half ago, and the estimated ship date is May 1st. but it was delayed so many times that I'm not even sure that if I get them, but that's okay. We'll find some alternative solutions. But even with things that were available, they were getting quite expensive. The lead times for the things we ordered, as the robot arm and the mobile robot base, was also getting longer. If anything got broken, you had to wait for the components to fix it, and it also took time. So we're quite a bit behind schedule and seasonality of our problem, because we can obviously only work when the health plants are in at least partially developed. Is also adding to this. So we had the robot completed basically late autumn. So, well, we can't do a lot with it right now because there's no hemp plants to treat. This is also partially affected by this price hike in terms of feeding costs, because we were thinking of having at least some plants available for testing, but heating costs have grown 5 to 6 times, and therefore we can't afford a greenhouse. The project budget is just, not allowing that. But bear with me, we did not give up. And right now we're getting in the second part where I show you what we are actually capable of completing. And so we get the robot basically needs some kind of brain. Actually, our robot has 2 brains. One is typical PC, embedded PC that is in a rugged enclosure, enabling it to work in tough environmental conditions with many ports. So it's a standard PC in the sense that it's hardware-wise like your laptop or a computer you have at home, and we use it for system-wide control that is driving, getting the sensor data, and then getting the robot to react to the external conditions so that it can perform the task of driving around the field. And the other brain is specifically used for those AI workloads that are mostly having to deal with the need for processing images. And this is a NVIDIA Xavier NX embedded board that has some AI accelerators built in, so that those algorithms are actually performed at a speed that is real time or near real time, so that we can actually perform this task as the robot drives around or as the end effector moves. Everything's integrated under ROS, that is Robotic Operating System, which is a standard in robotics, basically, in the robotics industry, which enables us seamless integration of different sensors, different algorithms, etc., etc. So it's a really nice things to have, and we also have experience in using that. So we decided to go for that. Aside from the capability of driving on and kind of thinking, the robot has to have some sensors, and so the robot base is fitted with dual GPS, that is RTK GPS, that is precise to under a few centimeters, so we can also get robot frame twist, so kind of heading of the robot if we use 2 of those. It has dual mounted RGBD cameras for the detection of male plants that are mounted on the robot base, and also 2 LiDAR sensors that are used for navigation in terms of like getting into in the middle of those paths that are created for the robot to drive around the field. And like I mentioned, we didn't have much to work with for quite a long time because of the delays, but we still managed to, since we have the CAD models, to perform a lot of simulation experiments, like control of the robot that drives around, performs certain tasks along a specific path, how it reacts to different sensor input. So like time wasn't wasted. Well, still wasn't a perfect situation, but when the robot actually came in, we were ready. And as you'll see, we are able to get the robot to do what we wanted. Like it can go along the specified path. It also reads the LiDAR sensors, which basically show you the yellow dots that are aligned with the arrangement of walls within this garage that we keep the robot in. So basically, we're able to get the robot to drive a certain path and to react to the sensory input, which is nice. It's basic for this field navigation. Our work on detection of male plants was also started in simulation. As you can see, we were able to put together quite realistic-looking plants that we then used as a source of image input for the detection algorithms that we're training. The algorithms are mostly based on YOLO family of detectors. And the first tests were conducted using simulation data, but then we switched to real data. As you can see, the real data looks much worse, but also some kind of problem with lighting, because it was some plants that were just grown indoors. And the results that we got from indoor plants were actually quite satisfying. It's obviously not something that will completely substitute getting into the field, because, well, the transferability problems were discussed vastly in the previous presentation. So that we also envisioned to have this problem. But we're able to get over 90% accuracy in plant detection. It's MAP at 50, which means that we only consider detections that have at least 50% overlap of bounding boxes that are hand annotated, that is gram through, with the bounding boxes that are actually detected by the algorithm. So I think we could even go a bit lower, but it's decent overlap, and it's a kind of standard method that's used to measure those type of algorithms. And the MAP, basically AP, because we only have one class, that is those male hemp flowers, is over 90, which means that is the area under the approximated area under the recall precision curve is 0.9, with 9 being perfect. So we're quite happy with the results that we got, and I think it's a good starting point for trying to find those flowers in the field. So this component aside, we are able to find plants. We also need to grab them, as mentioned before, and these are the first models of our end effector. We went through a series of prototypes, and now the prototype that we're happy with is mounted on the arm and is also already being used in grafting experiments, also being integrated into ROS. And we did a series of experiments that confirmed that it's actually able to grab an elongated object and inject a measured portion of some liquid into it. This is how it looks. As you can see, it's mounted on the arm, and the arm also is equipped with RGBD camera that provides visual input for the algorithms that we'll discuss later. Yeah, and it's I think that we went through quite a lot of prototypes, and we tried to envision any problem. For example, we had some problems with plants being stuck in those needles, or like on those needles. But the most recent version, as you can see, as it flexes, it presses the plant against those needles, but as it extends back, it like kind of pulls aside the plants from those needles. So turned out to be the solution to our problem. So we're able to grab the plants and inject the herbicide. We're able to find them, so we need to grab them, right? So we need to know where to grab, actually. So we prepared a diverse data set of images that were annotated. Those stems aren't actually red. Those are annotations that were performed by our staff. And the data set consists of indoor, outdoor collected images, but also some simulated images. And we tried a few of approaches. First was when our data set was still small, convolutional neural network with 2 linear inputs for the angle and the location of the stem in the middle of the image. But then we quickly turned to some segmentation-based methods that you can see here. The stems are successfully detected. But recently, the best results we got were actually also using those algorithms from the YOLO family. They can also be using a version that performs detection, but also segmentation within bounding boxes. Everything's integrated in ROS already, so we can just mount it on a robot and it should work, but it hasn't been tested yet. We chose YOLO because even though the F1 score, dice score for single class segmentation is not that great, but we're having a lot of really tough cases in our data set. As you can see, the stems in here are really small. Not all of them are being detected. It obviously impacts the F1. Also, some of the pixels that are assigned to the stems by the annotators are not perfectly aligned with the detections. It's also impacting the accuracy. But the algorithm's errors mostly in difficult cases, and the errors it makes for the easier cases are easy to tolerate. As you can see, if you really approach the plant and we're really close, the stems are well detected quite reliably. So we decided to go with that. And with this segmentation result ready, we're able to project this segmentation result on our depth image, because what you see here on this manipulated RGBD camera. So basically, you get a 3D location of the stem from that. And using this 3D location, you can locate this stem in space and use a visual servoing algorithm to generate a trajectory that if the robot follows it, it will eventually end in a position that would allow us to grab this stem. Since it's quite a dynamic environment and the plant can be kind of displaced, for example, by gusts of wind, we provide visual feedback at 10 plus hertz, so the gripper and the arm can adapt to the changing pose of the plants. And here's how the process looks. Might not be obvious from what you see here, but actually, yeah, it's confirmed that the robot adapts its orientation and position to the position of the detected stem. It was looking nice in this video. We have performed quite a few other tests that confirm that even with multiple stems and like more challenging backgrounds, it performs quite well. Obviously, it does not, I don't know, like, it's not a substitute for real life tests, but we need to wait for them. We're actually waiting for spring and then the summer to actually be able to work on real plants. So those elements that were shown here are already operational, and we will now come to the summary. So although the project is delayed for other reasons that were mentioned before, parts of the system are operational. We actually started working on integration, so we will be mounting the arm on the robot next week. We'll be driving around with the arm, trying to grab those plastic plants that we have at the level at which it will actually reside, right? So the arm will be mounted on top of the robot. We really didn't expect that this will be so hard. Like, I knew that working with hardware is hard, but what's really happened, it exceeded our expectations. It's a quite complex project with a lot of moving parts, and we're not using standard components due to cost and also due to the fact that we had to adapt to the problem at hand, and that caused other problems. But the individual part of the project are actually performing as we intended them. So plant detection, stem detection, grasping, injection, and parts of the navigation pipeline are accurate enough, but it was done in partially simulated or artificial conditions. So obviously need to correct for that once we get into the phase of field test that will hopefully come after this next spring. We hope to have this robot ready in the spring, late spring. It should be just ready to roll out in the field. And once the hemp plants grow big enough in order to be graspable, or in order to perform an environment that we can traverse or try to navigate, and we'll just start to work in this realistic conditions. So that's it from me. I hope that was kind of interesting to you, because like I said, I'm not agriculture expert. I also obliged to mention that the research was funded by the Polish National Center of Research and Development. And if you like the results of our work, I invite you to visit our webpage, or if you want to discuss some issues that are related to it, please contact me directly. My email address is given here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marek. It was a great presentation and I learned a lot. I'm more on the life science part of the world, so talking about robots is very interesting. We are still waiting for questions in our Q&A box, and I suppose everyone is in a dire need of a coffee. But before we can go to the coffee, I've got a few questions myself. So what do you think, what is more difficult? Training a vision processing model for the stem detection, for example, or programming of the robot or building of a robot? Which part is more difficult?
I would have to say that building of the robot. Also partially because of the fact that in terms of vision processing, I usually know what to do, but when this robot construction came up and it had to be built according to some specifications that was actually resulting in quite a big construction that was hard to make due to the aforementioned problems. That was really problematic. And also, I'm not an expert on navigation per se, so I trust my colleagues. Obviously, this whole is a result of work of a large group of people, and the excerpts that I shown you that deal with vision were actually done at our lab. But this navigation part that's been done by a partner, and also a vast body of work that was performed by our partner, this Institute of Fibrous Plants, that they try to come up with a herbicide that would on one side be least harmful or toxic, on the other side would perform well. And they also work with this different arrangements of the field. It was all coming together. But still would to say that the construction of the robot and programming of the robot was the hardest thing.
Thank you. The design of the robot actually reminds me of maybe another thing that could be done, pollination in the field, because I remember going into the field and pollinating some plants, oilseed plants, and I suppose a similar design that you have could be applied for this purpose probably. So do you intend to try to maybe branch into other projects that could use this design?
Yeah. As I mentioned, it's quite universal. We actually, the Institute of Fibrous Plants and Medicinal Products has a vision for using this for spraying the kind of sticky substance that's based on sugar, so that the seeds won't fall off the plants, because quite a lot of seeds get lost in the harvesting process. And as the plants get ripe, obviously they're not ready at the same point in time. And they say that's been quite a few experiments in spraying them with this sticky substance, and it also helps to increase the yield in terms of the number of seeds, or the weight of seeds you collect, by 20 or 30%. I think that in terms of pollination, I've seen a robot similar to this one. It's actually equipped with ventilators that were creating strong gusts of wind that would blow the pollen from some flowers, and that would pollinate other plants in the vicinity. So yeah, there's quite a lot of applications of this arrangement, of this typical type of robot. I think that it is still to be explored. Obviously, we need to finish with this one.
Thank you. Are there any more questions maybe from my co-chairs? I was wondering about going into the field, because the field is always very heterogeneous, as Jerome as well mentioned. I would expect there might be problems with wind moving the plants, if this could potentially impair the gripping of the robot on the stem. Do you have something developed to counteract?
I think with this update rate of 10 Hertz, since we use visual serving, it's not a one-shot process where you try to see where the plant is and just follow trajectory that's predefined. It's an adaptable process that updates every 10th of the second. So with small gusts of wind, I think we'll be able to deal with that. With strong gusts of wind, I'm not sure. But with this arrangement of plants, actually unpollinated hemp is actually quite dense. It's not so easy penetrated by wind. So it's also mentioned by our partners. So we hope that, obviously we can't imagine everything, but we hope that what we did for now will suffice to deal with most of the cases, at least.
Okay. Maybe it's a silly question from me, because I know a little bit about convolutional neural networks, but I never heard about a YOLO type of algorithm. Could you maybe just quickly describe what is a YOLO type of algorithm?
Okay. YOLO is an acronym for You Only Look Once. It's actually a successful branch of object detection algorithms that work really fast and reliably. Basic function of YOLO is to detect an object in terms of providing a bounding box in which the object is enclosed. With newer versions, you also have this option for segmentation of the object inside the bounding box. So it will not only tell you, hey, the object is within this rectangle, but it will also give you clear delineation of this object. It's actually quite famous. I think that we got version 8 now. So we had version 1, version 2, then was version 9000, then was 3, 4, and there's a lot of varieties of YOLO, like YOLO R, YOLO X. And because this algorithm is quite widely known and is being used as a base to developing some more application-specific things, like, for example, small objects, remote sensing. It needs to be more sensitive towards small objects, and it needs to provide rotation invariance. So people modify it in order to provide those capabilities, right? I think if you look it up, you come up with lots of resources. I think it's quite popular.
Sounds very interesting. I'm sorry, I'm seeing another question. How possible it is, in your opinion, to adjust the robots to use in other plants?
I have thought about using a similar robot, because actually it was an idea from a company that built the robot for us, that they were contacted by someone who grows blueberries, and they were thinking of building a robot to treat blueberry bushes. Obviously, that would be smaller, less tall, but it will also have this inverse U shape. And they were contacting us because they were saying that, okay, they can make this mobile robot base, but in terms of navigation and maybe those end effectors that will be used for picking the fruit, we'll have to, cooperate with them. So that's one idea. I know that similar robots are being used for a lot of things. Like I thought about pollinating. I can't remember what plant it was, but I have seen such robots used with UVC lamps, for example, to eliminate some fungal growth on grapes. I've seen such arrangements of robots used to spray different substances on plants that are in the form of bushes of singular plants. Obviously, this gives you a great potential for whole plant penetration. You're not only spraying from above, but basically from every angle. So I think that the potential is there. It's still a field that's being developed. It has a lot of promise, and actually quite excited to start working on that. We were basically, before we were working with drones, and this project, although it's been really difficult, it's also quite satisfying. Like, I think we made the first step towards doing a lot of more complicated things with that.
Thank you very much. So I think we are ready for our coffee break, and we will reconvene at 11:20.